Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Enchanted Circle Wildfire Series. I'd like to introduce our Taos County Commission Chair, Mascareñas. District 3 Commissioner Darlene Cahill. District 4 County Commissioner Antoinette Brush. Owen from the Taos River. CEO of Carson, Luis Reyes. Chancellor of UNM-Taos, Dr. Ortez. Thank you for joining us tonight for this first session of the Enchanted Circle Wildfire Series. This important series is proudly sponsored by Taos County, Carson and UNM-Taos, with the refreshments provided by the Enchanted Circle Association of Realtors. Over the course of this four-part series, we will explore critical topics surrounding wildfires, aiming to equip our community with the knowledge and tools needed to better understand and prepare for these natural events. Tonight, in our first session, we will focus on the state of the forest. We will explore the current conditions of our forest, the factors contributing to wildfire risk, and the measures being taken to manage and protect these vital ecosystems. In the upcoming sessions, we will cover wildfire preparedness in session 2, which will be on May 1st in this building. This will be the strategies and actions we can take to safeguard our homes and our communities. In session 3, will be lessons learned on May 29th, which will be the insights and experiences from past wildfires, such as Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon fires, and helping us to improve our response and recovery efforts. Session 4 will be real estate and insurance dialogue on June 12th, a discussion on the implications of potential wildfires on the real estate and insurance industry, providing valuable information for homeowners and property buyers. We are fortunate to have a lineup of knowledgeable speakers and experts who will share their insights and answer your questions throughout the series. The video of tonight's series will also be distributed on Taos County's website and Carson Electric's website and UNM-Taos' website or through our YouTube channels. Once again, thank you for being here this evening. Your participation and engagement are crucial as we work together to enhance our community's resiliency to wildfires. Let's get started with the first session on the state of the forest. J.R. Hogan, Taos County's Forest and Watershed Health Program Manager, will be the moderator for this evening, and he will introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Did you guys hear me okay? As Brent mentioned, my name is J.R. Hogan. I'm a resident of San Francisco. I'm from Taos for 15
evening, everybody. Brent Davidson. I'm the Fuels and Fire Staff Officer for the Carson National Forest. I've been in this position for just under seven years now, in either the Deputy Fire Staff or the Fire Staff position. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Kirtland, New Mexico. I went to UNM for college, and then I started with the Forest Service in 2001 as a seasonal biological technician. And got introduced to fire there, and that kind of changed my career path. I was on a hotshot cruise in the Coconino National Forest in Flagstaff, Arizona for about 12 years after that, and then moved to Driggs, Idaho, and worked on the Caribou-Targhee National Forest as Assistant Fire Management Officer, and then back to New Mexico on the Sandia Ranger District on the Cibola as Fire Management Officer for a little while. So I think I made a star pattern at some point, moving around in my career, but yeah, that's my background. Happy to be here tonight.
Hi folks, my name is Owen Burney. I'm a professor at New Mexico State University and director of the John T. Harrington Forestry Research Center in Mora. So in that capacity, our focus is on a restoration after the fire. So a lot of the research we deal with is from that whole reforestation pipeline. So we deal with seed and genetics, nursery production, planting, and post-planting activities. But I've worn a lot of hats in my career too. So I've done forest management, I've fought fires, and so I'm kind of bringing a different kind of view on forestry, but hopefully we'll talk a little bit about what we could do preventatively, but also what may need to happen when we do have our fire.
Hello everyone, I'm Kristina Ortez. I am your state rep for House District 42, which is most of Taos County, but not all of it. This is my 5th year. I just completed my 5th session in the legislature, and it's been a wild ride, certainly. And I definitely came into this session wanting to do something at the state level for wildlife preparedness, and I'm excited that we're going to be able to talk about that today. I, in my past life, was the executive director of the Taos Land Trust. I did that for 10 years, and so I'm really interested in natural solutions and what we can do and the investments we can make in the restoration economy, in making sure that our lands are resilient, our people are resilient, and that our state can withstand what is soon to come.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here. State Senator Roberto Gonzales. I will be starting my 31 year at the New Mexico legislature, and I'm very pleased to see the background and the experience from our panel. I was in my college days, that's quite a few years back. I fought fires in every state in the West, and pretty much the experience gained and seeing the behavior of fire, the fire is the fire. And when anyone asks me about any kind of information, I will say every fire is different, every fire is unique. The most important part is that we're here, we're addressing it, and we have the support of our community. Is how can we all work together to make sure that we work in the area of prevention. So with that, I will yield back to our moderator.
Thanks, everybody. Professor, I want to start with you.
Okay, perfect.
How come wildfires now are so bad?
Just an easy.
What happened to our forests over the last century? What's changed both on the ground and in the macro scale? What is supercharging the behavior of fires to do things like wind speed campaign that may not have been normal or typical in the past?
All right, so I think it's a history lesson. So we're in school, right? You guys have, okay. Got your notebooks. We're gonna have a test afterward. No. So, thinking about the history, and this is really about the Western U.S. as a whole. Historically, fires were a major contributor to our forest ecosystem. And so lightning and human causes were the primary drivers for those fires. And In our ponderosa pine-dominated forest, we would see a fire interval 3 to 17 years, depending on where and when. But we would see fire often. And so that occurred for thousands and thousands of years, with Native Americans contributing to maybe 50% of that fire, with lightning being the other half. Fast forward, and now we bring in European settlement, and we start changing the dynamics with rangeland. So when we're bringing in cattle and sheep, we start degrading that grass layer, which is a really good, important fuel for moving fire for a low severity fire. So in these intervals of 3 to 17 years, when we had these grasses, it would just come in as a low severity, cool burning fire. You may lose some trees, and of course you'll have some stands that disappear, but you would have this ability to keep that fuel load down. Now we introduce the cattle and we introduce the sheep, and we start seeing a reduction in that fuel source that allows it to carry through. And then we add to this Bambi. That's right, Disney and Bambi came along during World War II, and we had this really great message of we've got to put out every fire. And if you look at the history of that, we had that tone for forever. We thought that if we lost our forest, we were losing that resource. And so we started putting out fires, and as a result, we started building up these fuel loads more and more and more. We've learned our lesson maybe 25 plus years ago, and we know what we needed to be doing and in terms of thinning and prescriptions, but the reality is we just haven't been able to do that at scale. So what we see right now is exactly what he was saying, and that is a supercharged forest ready to burn. And that is our problem. And I have kind of sent this message out to others before, but really it's a two-pronged approach of what we need to be doing. And that approach is we need to be aggressively preventive measures for fuel reduction. So this is thinning operations and prescribed burns. But we are not going to be able to do that on all our acres. So we will lose acres. Fire is coming, and it's going to come in these catastrophic events. I do want to point out a statistic I have, and I just pulled this up today. So if you haven't been to this, there's two really good websites. One is the New Mexico Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, and it gives you a map, and it gives you a color-coded map of fire risk. And so red being very high, orange being high, etc. And then there's another map, and this is through the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute. It's the vegetation treatment map. These are areas that have been treated for fuel reduction, for thinning. And so I looked at this, and I took the entire Sangre de Cristos in the 5 counties that it kind of represents. So think of that forest mountain area of Colfax, Mora, Taos, San Miguel, and Santa Fe counties. And what I found was the total area of forest is around 3 million acres. These are rough numbers. So of that, does anybody want to guess what is the very high acreage in terms of fire risk? You can give it to me as a percentage. 100 would be great, but that's not, we're close. It is at 50%. And then at high, we're at 18%. So between high and very high, we're at about 70% of that forest is at risk. Of that total 3 million acres, how much has been managed in since 2015?
7%.
She said 7%. It is 3%. And if you look, and they do have historical data, and it's not great, but it goes back probably a little bit before 1990. It wasn't that much. It was probably an additional 25,000 acres, which would add another percent. So it's a drop in the bucket. And so what I always promote is this two-pronged approach, and within each of those, 2 words: scale and urgency. And it is a problem, and it is scary, and it is a reality, and And the fires are coming. I mean, it's just without an army to do the work, they are coming. We just don't know if it's this year or next year. And the other report I just got was from the National Interagency Coordination Center. They put out a forecast for regions throughout the entire U.S. And our region here, our county, for the months of May and June are significant wildfire potential. And that just makes perfect sense. We've got the wind, it's coming up, we've got the temperatures coming up, we've had no snow, and the precip isn't really in the forecast. So, you know, it's a catastrophe that's gonna happen, and hopefully we can do things to at least protect ourselves and then do what we can to protect some of our watersheds and some of our important resources. So, and I'm gonna go into that in a minute, later on. Okay. Oh, you want to talk about it now?
Well, I want Brent to talk about it.
You're talking about it.
When I was driving through here today, the wind was blowing 44 miles an hour sustained, gusts up to 60, with like 9% relative humidity. You're a firefighter. Given the dryness of our fuels and those other conditions, and the history lesson professors gave us, talk about from a suppression side, putting out a fire that starts. Why? What was the stat? 90% of the forest is very high.
70% is high or very high.
Okay. Given those conditions of the weather, a fire starts today. What makes it hard to put out a fire like that if you're an agency like the Forest Service?
Sure. So everything Owen said, spot on. And you know, that accumulation of fuel, that compounded accumulation over many years, 100 years, whatever it is, that on top of the lack of either human-caused or natural ignitions to break up the continuity of the landscape. So a bunch of small fires across the landscape over time, reducing fuels, even on small scale level, still breaks up that continuity of the landscape. And without that, the compounded fuels allow it to burn freely over much bigger areas. So that, number one, is one of the biggest things, just the amount of fuel that's out there, and trying to safely operate as firefighters in that environment where it's ready to burn. It wants to burn, it has to burn. You know, and there's other natural processes that are out there that are gonna take over if fire doesn't, and create a different you know, fire hazard as well, you know, through insect disease, blowdown, things like that. So that accumulation of fuels is huge. I mean, that's the main one. And then, you know, in maybe the last 20 years, throwing on top of that some of the accumulation of different weather patterns and weather events. So going, you know, multiple years in a row of really dry seasons on top of each other, with soil moistures that are low, with, you know, large diameter fuels not recovering throughout the winter and accumulating moisture to slowly dry out through the spring, but just being readily available, kind of like we're in this year, where those larger diameter fuels are already at, you know, what would typically be like a June condition or something like that. So, you know, higher temperature in the springtime, along with, you know, fuels that haven't recovered over the winter, the large accumulation of fuels, and then, you know, the lack of those fire disturbances across the landscape. Those are the things that work all together to make the perfect storm for large fire growth. That's really what it is. And so, you know, as personnel go out to work or to respond to these different fire incidents, on a day like today, you know, if it's in the wrong spot, with too much fuel accumulation, not good access, you know, some steep slope or somewhere down below them in a canyon, you can't get firefighters safely in there to do anything on the small scale. So that's kind of where we sit right now. You throw on top of that multiple days of wind and things like that to continue to dry out fuels, or just continue to have those rapid fire spread and growth days in a row. Those are the real difficult things we face, you know, currently this year and in the past, you know, 10 to 15 years.
Thanks, Brent. George, the next question is for you. You know, a big chunk of that forest that's high risk and very high risk is on Taos Pueblo lands, in the Blue Lake Wilderness, just to the north of us in the Rio Pueblo watershed. Can you talk a little bit about your concerns, you know, the Department of Natural Resources, but also, you know, the village and the community of Taos Pueblo, not to mention the town of Taos and all those who live in Taos communities?
Yeah, definitely. the state, which means, 100% fire suppression. Accessibility is one thing that's really difficult for us because to get to a fire, if we do have a fire up on Taos Pueblo in the wilderness area, we don't have roads, we don't have trails. It's very steep. Take a day or two to get up there. To get equipment up there will be really difficult. So my main concern is accessibility. Before I get into accessibility, I just want to talk a little bit of what Brent was talking about, was the field. Taos Pueblo have been doing 100% fire suppression on any fires that do happen on Taos Pueblo land. And I know it's all our concern here. We all know this mountain. Some of us know the mountain is brought us here. So, it brought us here for a reason. And to take care of this mountain, it takes a whole community to address the issues or to take care of the mountain as we see it. We don't want to see this beautiful mountain go up in flames. So it takes a whole community, it takes a whole town, it takes a whole city, it takes a whole village to take care of this area. Water quality is a really big issue nowadays. If we get a fire up there, water quality is just something that is going to hit us hard. Downstream users are going to get hit hard. Taos Pueblo is going to get hit hard. That's our main source of water for our village. We drink out of that water. We bathe. We feed our kids out of that water. So it's a big issue for us. When we got back the land back, there was 100% fire suppression. And with the wilderness, there comes some rules and some laws that we have to go by. And one of them is the 100% fire suppression. Because of that, we add in fueling. Because we're just putting out the fire right away. We're not doing control burns like we used to. Like Owen was saying, before Europeans came, we were doing cultural burns. But then when we got our land back, we were restricted at managing our lands. And now we're starting to realize that, cultural burns is a way, it's a management tool. It's a way to
How many sessions have you got under your belt now? This is your fifth?
Fifth, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
In that time with House, just watching the bills that you've sponsored and the conversations and the connections that you've made, Wildfire appears to be something that is a bigger part of your legislative agenda. Can you talk a little bit about why?
Yeah, absolutely. Wildfire and water both, and they do go together. We have to make a lot more investment in our water resources and building water infrastructure so that we can be resilient as a community when we're dealing with these extreme weather events. In 2022, like in the middle of, in my framing, it was in the middle of the campaign season with the primary, just ahead of me, and there was, the Hermit's Peak Cap Canyon fire, gigantic fire, and so many resources were put toward not only stopping that fire, but to help folks in our community. And Taos County took in a lot of folks from Mora and San Miguel County. It was really thanks to, I think, the generosity of a lot of people in this audience who opened up their homes for people who, whose homes were burning and whose backyards were burning, whose, traditions and generations of, land stewardship were burned. So it really had a huge impact, I think, on how I saw what we can do at the state level to help these communities. And, it was, by the grace of God that our community wasn't affected the way Mora was. Truly, just the wind shifting in a different way could have devastated this community. We could have seen fire come down our foothills, to the Weimar area, the high school. That could happen. That did happen in LA just a few months ago. So it was with all of that, I started thinking about, fire behavior being weird, and these are the experts to talk about fire behavior, but just because the winds usually go from west to east doesn't mean that they do that in a fire. And so our community, every one of our communities, I think, is in danger. So we have to act now and make those investments now. So that's what I saw coming into the session, knowing that this fire in LA, devastated two huge communities. What were we going to do at the state level to invest in not only the mitigation effort, but really like the suppression effort, and also the post-fire restoration? That was something that was really important to me.
Thank you. We'll talk about what's been done at the last session and others later in the conversation. Senator Gonzales. Again, pointing to the stats that the professor pointed out, we've got a lot of work in front of us in terms of management to try and deal with this situation. That sounds really expensive. You sit on the Legislative Finance Committee. Does the state of New Mexico have enough money to pay for this? And if not, how can they tap into federal funds or other funds to try and address a lot of the concerns that have been raised here so far?
Thank you for the question. And to answer your question, the answer is yes. We're very fortunate that the last few years, we have seen the revenues for the state are high. And I might say, just for an example, this last year, right off the top of the budget, $100 million was set to assist, where fires have already occurred. And later, there was more because then we ended up with additional fires that we had through the state. But this is very interesting, and I guess one of the points that I really are important that I want to make is being born and raised in Taos, and we can't go back to some of the things that have happened, but we definitely can go forward. And an example of that is my wife, myself, my family, we live up in Pocket, that is right in the forest. And that was our choice. We love the place, it's gorgeous, and our neighbors are beautiful. And when we then for whatever reasons with permitting, those were gone. Then the other part that is happening now is the salt cedar has taken over completely at a rate that is dangerous. And again, now with our lower communities that really rely on the acidics, a lot of that water is going into the salt cedar because it's not managed. And this year we were, and I'm working right now to where we do have funding to address some of that. So those are just a couple of things. The other part that I think that is very important for everyone to understand is for centuries, our people, they used to harvest wood, and that was the fuel for the winter. It was a must. Then for a while, you couldn't get a permit for anything, and if you got one, it was miles and miles away. So eventually, a lot of our families turned into a different alternative type of heating to where they go for wood. So of course, there goes to that problem we talk about, accumulation of fuel. So these are some of the things that we do have to recognize, and we are moving forward very strong. This year, there was 5 initiatives that were introduced to the legislature, and 4 passed with the signature of the governor. There's one that she really would like us to work a little bit more on, which is big progress from prior years to where there was many years that we never even had one piece of legislation to address this. And the strongest one, 2 points that are very strong, is last year for the first time, we funded 2 full crews year-round for hotshot crews. One being placed in Las Vegas, New Mexico, the other one in Socorro. And in my view, and we have an excellent state forester, Laura McCarthy. She's doing a great job. In my view, right now today, we could use 8 of those crews throughout the state. And these are crews that are going to be working 365. They're full employees. They're going to be addressing, the situation when there's fires and when there isn't, maintenance and thinning and whatever it involves with this. This is a really, really strong component. The other one is that I had a long discussion with the governor. And right now, if we had to have an emergency, there's very, very few places that we can draw water. For example, where the helicopters do a draw and start addressing the fire need. And we talked about, perhaps in the state going with at least a few earth dams to have some capacity for some water emergency bases. And not taking any water rights, not taking anything from anyone, just to be able to have a volume capacity, within our reach during an emergency.
explain to us what good forest management looks like, let's say in those trifights, to keep it simple, and how that end product, finished product might differ from what people see when they drive towards their Gonzales' house in Pop Creek or US Hill or any other forest around this area. What does good management look like, and what should the end result look like that people might need to recalibrate what a healthy forest looks like, just in their day-to-day life?
Yeah, this is a challenging question because for those who know Kent Reed, he was director of the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute probably about 6 years ago. He's always said, when it comes to forest management as a private landowner and you're trying to think about how much you should thin, think about that and go a little further to where it hurts. Because basically what's happening is a lot of folks think that they're doing it right, or reducing that volume or density to the right levels. But the reality is the fire is just going to go right through it just the same. And so the reality is, we have to be pretty aggressive in terms of our thinning, and there are different approaches and some new directions folks are researching. But it's kind of this groupy, clumpy, with lots of open space and some individual trees, because what you're trying to do is minimize how that fire can carry as a crown fire. But the sad truth is, I have seen really good thinning operations, and you probably have too, that have burned completely down. And I've seen some work. I think part of it is it's a numbers game at the end of the day, and I mentioned it just, the last time I chatted, I said it's about scale and urgency. And so if we're doing 10 acres here, and we're doing 15 acres there, and maybe we've got a 100-acre block over here, that's great. But the reality is that's probably not going to do anything. We thinned on our property in Mora 10 acres really aggressively, and we were affected by the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire, and we lost half our property, and that included the area we thinned. So I think what it looks like in terms of when you're driving is this contiguous area that allows you to have a buffer. So if a fire is coming from an area of high density and it's going into an area that's been thinned, it can still burn through that. But then eventually it begins to lose steam if it has enough space and time to do so. And so, for me, that's how I see that drive, is this long, area that has been managed. And the reality is that's a lot of work. And I was kind of crunching some numbers, and I was going to ask you this too, but what does it cost per acre to do about $1,000 an acre? Is that? Are we at 2 now?
3.
We're at 3. Okay. So if you're looking at only managing the very high areas of acreage just in the Sangre de Cristos, so you multiply 1.5 million acres by that, and we're talking, what is that, 4.5 billion? Do we have 4.5 billion? Well, then here's the other element, and I think I'm stealing his thunder. Can we do it all at once?
Well, that's right. And to be clear, when you say thin aggressively, does that mean clear cut? Does that mean chop all the big trees down? What is that? There's a perception, I think, amongst people who are wary of this, that this is a timber operation veiled as a restoration operation. In my mind, the drive is that a real true thinning operation that has ecological benefit targets those smaller trees in the understory, creates that groupy, clumpy, uneven age. It's variation in the state.
I think you can harvest big trees too to potentially help pay for if there was a market. That's another piece to this. But I think you do want to thin your small diameter. You want to thin the small material, because then you're emulating the natural process. If you go back in history and you had the grasses and you had the fire, you would be burning out all that small stuff, and you'd be leaving a lot of the big stuff. Some of the small stuff would stay here and there, and you would take out maybe a big tree here and there, and so you can emulate that in your thinning prescription. What I hope we can do to help pay for some of this, you know, and expedite it too, I mean, we need to expand our mill operations and our markets. And this is something that folks in Arizona and Colorado, we're trying to look at what are good markets. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the #1 market right now for our forest products is firewood. And that is the lowest value you can get. And so there's a lot of value there. And there used to be lots of mills. But then the spotted owl came in, and there was a big financial problem in the late 80s, and then we just had a lot of mills close shop. And so things have changed. So, you know, what does the future look like? I think we have to change how aggressive we are, and we have to use science-based approaches of how we thin. It's not all about the economics of it, but we need to incorporate that into it so that we have a way to pay for this so it doesn't fully rely on the taxpayer dollar or oil and gas money, where that could be used for other resources.
Gotcha. Thank you. Brent? Let's talk about that for you. Or that for you.
My favorite subject.
Owen mentioned a couple times on the panel, thinning with a chainsaw or machinery is very expensive. We also know that certain kinds of fire, low severity frequent fire, is more typical in the area where we live in certain parts of this forest. What role can and should fire play on the landscape, including prescribed fire, and how do we overcome the controversial nature of prescribed fire in the wake of hermits being cut candy?
I could talk about this topic for a long time, so cut me off when it's time to be done. Everybody knows this. I'm going to say it anyway to start this off. Fire has its place in nature, in the natural world that we all exist in here. So if we continue to choose to live here, we're going to be impacted or affected or witness to that in one way or another, whether it's the smoke, whether it's the actual fire impact, you know, whether it's the runoff portion of it or the secondary fire effects and things like that happen after post-fire, but it's part of this natural world, natural landscape. Everybody knows that, I think, at this point, but to add on to that, fire's place in that natural world and natural landscape is different now. It's not always low intensity fire across the forest floor. In fact, that's the rarity. That's what we're doing with a lot of our prescribed fire, but I think that we need to come around to the thinking of it's not just low severity, it's a mixed severity. We live in a place with different forest types, vegetation types, fuel types, if you will, and some of those are going to require a stand replacing fire that burns all the trees in that stand. Hopefully not all at once, but we still, like I talked about before, that's part of the natural world, that's part of the natural role. And unfortunately, part of that fire regime now is also the large-scale catastrophic wildfire. And so that's something that we have to know that we're going to have to deal with, and it's part of where we're at now. I think a lot of what has gotten us to this world, I'm going to get a little deep here, I think, so I apologize, but there's kind of an innate human response to fire, I think, that people have had throughout time, where it's kind of a fire bad mentality, right? It's scary, it's hot, it can harm you, it makes the things that you look at different, probably for the rest of your lifetime. So trying to think of that on a longer term scale, that it goes beyond our lifetime, even the good fire or the fire that's beneficial to the ecosystem may change very drastically what you're used to seeing, you know, in your backyards or on the mountain or whatever. But it's way longer than our lifetime. It takes many different, you know, it could take hundreds of years to be back to that condition that we're used to seeing right now. But there's a successional species that comes in and all these different things. So changing that mindset, I think, helps with fire's role in our natural world and the landscape and everything. There's all the tools in the toolbox, if you will. There's prescribed fire, there's mechanical treatments, there's timber harvest, there's thinning. A lot of those produce other things that we have to deal with, which is slash. Slash management is a big deal. Trying to figure out how to deal with that slash, when to burn piles when our winters are shorter and things like that. So using all those tools is very important, but there's a balance involved with it. The one thing that I think is or two things that are tied together. It's the appropriate response to fire. So there are times, especially in our area still, where we have opportunities for beneficial fire to happen through natural conditions. We have lightning strikes that are in the right place in the right time, and those are valuable to have the fire occurrences occurring on the landscape, that we use those to the benefit of the ecosystem and to our things that we care about, our watersheds, our private lands, our infrastructure and things like that. That's a very important thing. So knowing when we need to jump on a fire and suppress it fully, or when we can use that fire to benefit certain parts and suppress certain parts, and that appropriate response is very, very valuable, because it's another one of the tools that we have available to just continue that natural cycle of fire on the landscape. Another one that's directly tied to that, I think, is fire-adapted ecosystems and communities. So the only way we're going to have those fire-adapted ecosystems and communities is to have them ready to accept fire, or to have fire burn across them to get them back to a condition where fire across them again does not harm them as much. And that goes for communities as well as the landscape itself. And then the very strategic placement of our fuels, treatments, and our prescribed fires is huge. Really looking at, which we've done, JR's done on his own, we've done together with a whole bunch of different partners, is being strategic about where those locations are that are going to protect the most values. Because the price tag's huge, the sheer volume of areas we need to treat is huge, so finding the really key places to have fire in the landscape is really important. One other things is sometimes, I wrote down here, extreme fire equals extreme fires. Sometimes it's just going to be a fire that there's not a whole lot you can do. And sometimes the human-built environment is another one of the fuel types. If our communities and infrastructure is not somehow fire adapted or fire protected or whatever, then sometimes it's house to house to house to house underneath the extreme conditions rather than tree to tree. So that's really important to just the long-term resilience of communities. One final thing, it's really quick. Under some of the most, there are examples of all these treatments and things working and not working, and it's going to be conditions dependent, I think. But we do have a really awesome success story on the Carson, and it's the Midnight Fire, and it was in 2022, at the same time the Hurricane Canyon Fire was burning. It's on the west side of the forest, just I guess north of El Rito. And in that area, there was a combination of natural ignited wildfire that was managed in a way other than just putting it out at the smallest level, along with some fuels treatments and some prescribed fire. And under those conditions, the fire came up out of a canyon and did hit those treatments and the previous wildfire, and it was where everybody was able to catch that fire. So it does work even under the most extreme conditions. Other times it may not, it's just conditions. But there's some good examples of those catcher's mitts and things that help us.
Thank you, Brent. I want to throw it to Kristina. Tell us about the Wildfire Preparedness, which was passed and signed by the governor this year into law. What is that bill aiming to address specifically, and in what ways does it speak to what Owen and Brent are talking about?
Thanks for that. That bill in particular, I'm on right, was introduced by Liz Mechanics on the Senate side and was co-sponsored by Harlan Vinson, who's a Republican representative in Ruidoso, and myself and a couple of others, and he really carried the water on this bill on the House side. So what that bill does, and this is sort of, I think, indicative of like what we actually do in government, which is very different from I think what a lot of people think that we do. So this bill, it sounds, when I describe it, really boring, but it's really, really important. And it does three essential things. It sets up, it sort of expands the existing task force of folks who are talking about fire, and it brings more people into that conversation so that we can have some really science-based approaches to how we're going to manage and deal with fire in our state. It sets up a program at the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, the Wildfire Preparedness program. And so so what that does is that task force is going to be working to develop guidelines so that we can eventually offer grants to private landowners so that they can really harden their homes, so that they can make their homes and their defensive and their space around their homes defensible, and protect our private landowners from a fire devastating their homes. And I think that's really important because what we saw, I don't know, I'm not the only one, I think, after Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon, my insurance went up about 75%. Please raise your hand if your homeowner's insurance went up in the last 2 years. Nearly everyone. That is what we are paying for it, and we will continue to pay for it. So if you live in the forest, and this is going to be controversial, but you're going to have to do some work to make sure that that your home and your private land is safe from ravaging wildfires. So that's what that does, and it sets up a fund at the state level. It was a really hard bill to get through. You would think that it shouldn't be, but we have something in this state called the anti-donation clause, and I'm sure many of you have run up against it, where you're not supposed to use state funds for private businesses or citizens. And so we have to really have a robust conversation about how we're going to get state funds, your dollars, to private landowners. And that's where this task force comes in, where they're going to develop guidelines, because this is a public safety issue, and it's the kind of thing that, if it's done right, it could save us a lot of money. So that's what that bill does. It's, there was a robust conversation, debate on the House floor about it, particularly around the anti-donation, because, why is this thing exempt from anti-donation and not other things? And that's, I think it's really important to talk about that. How fires can not only, devastate communities, but can devastate watersheds for decades, or drinking water, all of that. So, and private landowners have a role to play. I think it's really important that we do this now in the face of real uncertainty from the federal government and how those dollars are going to flow to our community. So that's really what it's all about.
Thank you. Senator.
I'm here.
I want to hear more about the forest products industry in New Mexico and what the state legislature can do to support it. What it's done in recent past and what might be on the back burner brewing throughout the next sessions.
Very well, thank you. With the timber grading bill, that was House Bill 553, and then we have a Senate version of that bill, and it was signed by the governor. The bill creates the Timber Grading Act, empowering the Forest Division of Energy, Minerals and Natural Resources Department to create and administer a certification program for grading the structure, timbers used for construction. The bill creates those owners and operators with training to administer the product, following the procedures based on the American Lumber Standard Committee best practice. This is the beginning, and I do want to acknowledge the presence of Dan Maroney, who really helped with this legislation. And we have many products, for example, I never realized, how many Christmas trees came from the Mona area, until, they were saying, what are we going to do now that we don't have, that. And that's just another example. So we talk about how New Mexico is growing on outdoor education, outdoor promotion of economic development also. That's just another area. So within that, I see this as a beginning. We have always had very talented individuals in our state with using wood products, and I just see an enhancement to that. And I'm ready for more if you want.
Money questions.
Okay.
Thanks. George, I'll read my contact. So, we've got forests that are real messed up. It's hard to put the fires out. We're doing something about the private landowners, and we're trying to support industry.
This is an interesting question. It does, like I was talking earlier, it does take a community, takes a town, takes a city to manage this area. One of the issues is manpower. Taos Pueblo doesn't have the manpower to battle these large fires. In the state, we've seen our fair share of large wildfires. So Herman's Peak, the Haynes fire, I think I'll remember that fire.
Los Conchas?
Los Conchas fire. So we've had our fair share of fires here. So collaboration is a big deal for us. We look out, for Taos Pueblo, we look out to entities, state, energy, minerals to help us manage our forests. Like I was mentioning, Taos Pueblo sits at the headwaters, and we need to take care of our land so that you guys can all have good drinking water downstream. So with that collaboration there, it's a big deal. We've been talking with entities all the way down to Albuquerque, Socorro. What are you guys doing up in Taos? How are you managing? How are you managing your forests up there? So the collaboration is something that we all need to be a part of. Whether we're just regular landowners, whether we're working for the state, or whether we're working for the Carson National Forest, Taos Pueblo, it doesn't matter. We all need to come together and protect this beautiful mountain that we all see. We don't want to lose this mountain. We don't want to lose this beautiful area. This is where we all live. And if we do get a large fire here, it's going to be broadcasted all over. It's a big deal for us. So if we do have that collaboration, we can do a lot of good things here. Helping each other out, funding, supporting each other from Carson National Forest. These wildfires that we see now, wildfire has no boundaries. It doesn't care if there's a border. They're going to go over that border and burn everything there. So, the collaboration has to be there if we want to protect this mountain. It's a hard thing to talk about. People some people say, oh, well, they're doing their own thing, let's let them do it. But, in reality, we all should be helping each other out. That's the biggest issue. Just helping each other out.
Thank you, George. So we're right at about an hour of chatting. I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. If you guys have any, raise your hand. I'm happy to bounce around. And then if you guys don't mind, just pass the mic around to whoever is asking a question. Or
All right.
It's going to go there. Because I'm in this.
Concerning the fire that we had last year, was a pretty major burn. I don't know half of our forest around here. As far as 3 years ago, one burned half the other. I don't know. And I'm worried that the conditions don't no longer exist that that forest again. I'm thinking the conditions that created that forest again with 25,000 years ago. We have drier climates, we have things going on that are different, and I'm concerned that fire or that forest is not going to come back.
what's your name? Billy. Owen. Billy's got a question for you.
How's it going, Bill? There you are. Hey, Billy. So this is a little bit more in my specialty, which is restoration after the fire. And one thing we do know with the changing climate, and the conditions of these fires, that we may not get back those forests that we had before. So we have to think that some of these forests, it's going to be a shift in terms of its forest type and plant type. So when we are thinking about our restoration efforts in terms of reforestation, we are considering things such as assisted migration, which means we're looking at genetics or seed sources that are more adapted to warmer, drier environments. It may be the same species, but from a more southern latitude or lower in elevation, or maybe a completely shifting in species, so moving ponderosa pine, for example, further up in elevation. But we're doing this, again, very strategically and scientifically, because we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we put too many things in the wrong place and then we have some significant problems. There's a history of this, that goes back, from the 40s out in Oregon. We've learned our lessons, so when we think about how we can restore these forests, one, with planting, we can diversify the portfolio genetically in terms of species or sources, and two, accept that there's going to be some shift that does happen, and it will likely be for the better in terms of being more fire adapted in terms of that ecosystem. Hopefully that answered your question.
Hello. Yes.
Assisted migration.
We're doing our best to clear the land around our property. Make a healthy forest, allow the sun to come through the trees, the grasses to grow back. But my question is about absentee landowners.
Yeah, that's a great question. Can I have that?
Where I come from, helicopters would roam the areas. If you didn't groom your land, you would get fined. This is in California. So here, we're working very hard. I've got 4 years in cleaning our area. Of course, it's for future generations. But we have an absent owner who's trying to sell his land for highest profit. He doesn't care about the neighborhood, he doesn't care about the future. He's not part of our community. He just wants to make money. I'd like to see some kind of law where at least gets a tap on the door and gets a notice saying you've got 90 days to figure it out, or you can be fined. And if you keep neglecting this money, you lose your land, confiscated by the state, or given back to the forestry. So this is a big concern. We're working hard to make our forest healthy, but we've got these people who are not participating. So I'd like to see a law. I would just like to see some action. So these people just don't sit silently waiting for their profits. Thank you. What's your name?
Omjai. That sounded like a question maybe for our legislators. Do you want to tackle that one?
Very well. I just want to let everyone know that this happened, I'm going to say approximately about 15 years ago, even longer. And this was during one of the fires that was in Grazing. So at that time, the late Doug Williams was our study, and he did pass legislation to where exactly what you're saying about property that is being neglected. The county has the authority to go in and survey, and if they would want to at any point establish a working crew, whatever, and pass the bill to the owners. Now, if that doesn't happen, then you would have a lien on the property. But there is a law in place. It just needs to be, I think for many years everyone's just trying to tread very
Great. South Carolina here. I'll jump over to that side. Before I do, the topic of real estate, the topic of insurance is a whole other panel discussion for June 12th. So if you're eager to talk about that, please come to that one as well.
My name is Bobby Brent. I'm one of those landowners that came up. My property would cost me, based on somebody said 3,000 an acre to own. My property would cost me $900,000 to clean. And I'm surrounded by state land on one side, BM land on the side, other side, private ownership on the south side, Forest Service on the other side, so I'm surrounded by thousands of acres that are publicly owned. So for a landowner like me, spending $900,000 on a piece of property that isn't worth $900,000, which I don't have anyway, you know. So that's another problem that you're going to have with local owners. And I just wanted to make that as an observation that somebody can say, what can these people that own these parcels do? The only thing that I can do with it, I'm telling you right now, is sell it. And I can't do anything else with it because I'm burdened with the taxes on it, taking care of it, going to check it out if there's no trespassing. So it, you know, don't get me wrong, I really love my land. But at my age, in the mid-80s, what I do with it, keep it, I can't take it with me. I just want to make that observation.
You're not in your 80s, that's impossible. Can I just address, can I just, very quickly, this exactly the issue that SB 33 was designed to help you figure out how you can get some support from the state. And there are federal programs as well. So that's the kind of thing that we have to have these conversations. You know, there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing. You want to do the right thing, but I mean, almost $1 million, that's, you know, it's just, it's too hard to do that. So we'll have that conversation.
Thank you. Quick plug also, soil and water districts, Taos County, other local governments are constantly and regularly applying for grants to help landowners out themselves. The challenge is you've got 3 million acres to do, we can't do it all at once. And so to the point that Brent made earlier, you know, we collectively prioritize the areas that are at the top of that list, that are most dangerous. And we're trying to chip away at it. It doesn't prevent a landowner from going after their own funding, pursuing grants that are available through the state or otherwise. But there's a collective effort that it does require a lot of time and attention. So go through the time, just on the water district, but you're in help, talk to Jack, he's very smiling and helpful. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I was in advance of the question. But my name is Roberto Simmons. Really interested, obviously, the role that the industry will take and be able to help, and obviously incentivizing the people bring us there. Again, we all know that obviously housing costs are going up, so numbers are important to having local numbers. Great. I guess at the same time, are we also looking at broader like technology opportunities, like sort of bioenergy conversion stuff for gas and some of these other capabilities? Because exactly what I think to the point is there's a lot of biomass that's out there, especially to your point, low diameter, small diameter trees. So are we really just looking for cutting down trees and making boards, or are we looking at other possibilities out there from a technology perspective, or I guess address our broader energy needs?
Thanks. Brooks? It's like $1 million question.
Let me start.
I think we all probably.
I'm going to start and I'm going to pass it along. There are lots of different buckets in state government for innovations. There's advanced energy. There's a huge fund for that. There's lots of different opportunities to get funding through the Economic Development Department. And so I think that we didn't address that specifically in this year's budget, but I think that we've left the language in those big funds open for new and innovative opportunities for folks to make money while dealing with something that needs to really happen. So we'll just leave it at that.
Had a couple interesting biomass discussions over the last year, actually, and not something I'm super knowledgeable about, but actually in talking to those different companies, transport is a big part, right? And so when they talk about the small diameter stuff, it doesn't buy them any as much. The two companies that actually approached us looking for some opportunities to do biomass were looking for like whole tree stuff that's more important to, you know, all the fuel wood and things like that we have in the community, because in order to transport, they needed that larger diameter material to make worth their while. So it was interesting. Both of them approached us and we had great conversations, but it seemed to be a no-go in the area because of the other demands that we have.
We're going to do just a couple more questions and then wrap this thing up. Folks will be around afterwards.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, senators. Thank you, representatives, for helping with that bill to get passed. We really appreciate it. You know, in our community years ago, you know, a lot of the people were building. The reason they built southwestern style homes is it was cheap to build, because you can use the earth to build the adobes. You can go right to the mountains, get you a viga, put it in your house. I applaud the Pueblo because that's the way the Pueblo was built. Latias, everything was cheap. It was a way to build a very inexpensive. The only thing you had in it was your blood, sweat, and tears. So, you know, I've watched the evolution of what goes on in our community. You know, first it was the pinon tree. You know, we had people would cut a lot of pinon. We had a lot of pinon for sale in this area. They were shipping pinon. Then there was a moratorium on pinon cutting. Cutting of pinon anymore. Then the disease came to the pinon tree. So now we were begging everybody to cut the pinon tree because everybody didn't want to cut it. Now we're begging people. So then, 2008, we had the spotted owl. So they shut everything down. And since spotted owl, there was very little timber sales put up. Very few. There was very little work done on our national forest after that time. Staffing was the problem. Just recently, they started doing a lot of work within the national forest, state land, and I applaud them. But all of a sudden now, we don't have any staff. There's no forest staff. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's because of the new president, but all of a sudden there's no timber staff. There's a lot of staffing shortages. And are we going to go back to the way it was pre-2008? Are we going to not treat our forests? Everybody in this room is concerned about fire. Everyone. But if we're not going to treat it, tell us that we're not going to treat it because we don't have staff.
I can't answer that question. Well, you can answer part of it.
Is there a question today?
Sounds like a Forester's question.
He's probably not the right person to ask.
No. First off, that's off the Brent, because I was calling him this game for wearing Forest Service bags. He does, it's not the guy you want to laugh, but we can call him if you want. I'll say, from my perspective, a guy who works with the Forest Service and came in right out of bushy tail 5 years ago, I'm mad as hell and frustrated with the Forest Service as an agency, but to be honest, with the state of New Mexico, with the county, and every other government entity, because we are not, to Owen's point, moving fast enough, period. So, it is not the Forest Service's problem, is my answer to your question. It's all of ours' problem. So we got to figure out how to support one another. I don't know what that looks like, but they're trying on their side. I'll speak for you, Brent. They're trying on their side. My hope is that more conversations like this create more of an attitude of, yeah, we can address this collectively. Yeah, I knew you as a politician for a long time before I got into this. You are Mr. Community. Let's put the workloads on. I think this is better time than ever to try to start doing it. So thank you for your question. Let's do one last one. Okay. Sorry, I thought it was good because it's sad.
Thank you all for being here. And I do deal with forest getting a lot on private land. And for us, it's about $3,000 an acre. But for larger acreage, I think it is closer to 1.5 or 2. So your 900,000 might not be quite that high.
Back there.
But I want to actually speak to noxious weeds and specifically cheatgrass, which can carry fire faster than just about anything. It's all on our highways, and we're talking about ignition sites. What's going to bring that fire up to the forest is cheatgrass and
I'll finish up by saying that last year, historic investment in ecosystem management through the Land of Enchantment Fund, where hundreds of millions of dollars went to various agencies, including New Mexico Ag Department, for things like the Healthy Soil Program. So I think you can expect that there will be funding for managing invasives there, and also through the River Stewards Fund at the New Mexico Environment Department. So there's money, again, in all these crazy buckets, and we know we need to do a better job letting you know what those buckets are and what that money can be used for. But there is a lot of taxpayer money that we're putting into this. We just need to make it clear.
Great. Okay. If you still have your hand raised, come on the person up here if you want to ask that question before we speak out the back door. The next session, session 2 on wildfire preparedness, is going to be on May 1st. Same place, same time, I assume. Session 3 is going to be May 29th. That's going to be lessons learned. That's a case study from the Canyon fire and the fires on Mendoza. Hearing from those communities who are living in that post-fire environment. And then the last one, which I expect to be real popular, is June 14th, real estate and insurance implications before and after the fire. So jot those down, keep my son to stay on the clock. Everyone else can cover you with text messages and everything else on those days. But please come and thank you again. Please a round of applause for our panel.
JR, I think that some of us on this panel just wanted to take like 30 to 45 seconds to wrap up with some final thoughts. Is that possible?
Feel like you need to wrap up?
Well, I'm going to start, and I want to wrap up because we did not say the thing that we have to talk about, which is climate change and what we need to do in this state to manage and mitigate and reduce emissions so that we can continue to live here. And I want you to know that we tried and it didn't get anywhere. And so I need you to have some conversations with folks in power to actually address this issue. Yes, I know that half of our budget, thank you, comes from oil and gas, but that does not mean that we have to stop oil and gas completely. We have to make these technologies cleaner, and we have to address emissions because we will continue to see this. And so I'm just going to keep saying it. We've got to do something on climate change, and we've got to do it now because my daughter asked me if we were doing anything in this legislative session because we have to, and I feel really terrible that we didn't. Sorry, Mia. We didn't get it done, and we have to. So.
Again, thank you for being here and spending some of your valuable time also. I just, very quick, I just want to mention a couple of things. There's 112 legislators, and there's, of course, the governor's office. And how important is to get the information, how important it is to provide, good information to all legislators is going to be a key thing. Because a while ago, the question was, is there funding? Yes, there is funding. But we have to realize that when we go out against something like this, I have to convince my other 111 legislators, and the same thing with the representative. So that's one part that's very important. The other part I just wanted to mention, in my opinion, is we were great at helping ourselves years back. And what I mean by this is every community had firefighting crews. Mora had some, Taos Pueblo had some, Taos Pueblo, Taos, Roberto, just name them. And the whole point is that if you have a fire, and say that there was a fire in the back of the room, is how fast can you get to it from point A to point B? And so we have done some things. We took away those crews, and now so if there's a fire, time is everything. So if it takes 2 hours to get there, or does it take 1 day? That's the difference between 100 acres and 3,000 acres, is how fast can you get to that point. So we have done some things in the past. They worked, they were really good system of employment for many of our individuals in this community. And not also that, Taos Pueblo was recognized nationally, for being the top firefighter we have a crew, say that we want to have a crew, and we don't have enough transportation to get these crews to the airport. In the past, we used to use school buses. There's no harm there. All we're doing is using the buses to take crews from Cuesta to the airport and back. You know, then the state came with the idea that they couldn't do that anymore. The buses belong to the state, you know, and here again, you know, it's just one of those things that we have done, you know, and it's really to ourselves. But there's a lot of things that worked in the past, and we can revisit that by having some good discussions. Thank you.
I'll say just something really quick. I'm just going to reiterate a message I had in the beginning, and that when we talk about fire, it's two approaches. It's what we do preventatively, which is not necessarily my wheelhouse. I get in trouble when I talk about it. But it's the other side, and that's the restoration. And both require scale and urgency. And so we know we're going to have the fires, so we also need to be prepared in how we're going to restore that landscape back to something that's going to provide a service to us in terms of its water, community, timber, recreation, whatever it may be. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the turnout and the conversation with